Okay, so if it's super hot outside right now and you're struggling getting your running in, you're in the right spot. Running should make us feel good, it should energize us. Maybe you use it to keep your body composition in check. Maybe it's a social activity. Running should be a thing that makes us feel good, but sometimes the heat, the humidity makes it more challenging. Knowing this makes it even more difficult often to just get out there and start because it could be a tough run. It could be a tough time. And it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Knowing it's going to be hard makes it hard. And so today you're going to learn about some tips and tricks to hopefully help your warm running weather be a little more comfortable and a little more enjoyable. So I'm going to talk about knowing how to slow down your run, using the wind, shade, and sun direction to your advantage, how to stop post-run headaches. I'm going to talk about if you need water for short runs, and I'm going to talk about getting out early to run. And let's start with that last one about getting out early to run because it's often one of the first things mentioned. It's obviously going to be a good idea for most people in the heat, but it does come with one huge disadvantage, and I'll talk about that in my next point. But here in South Dakota, it could be 100 degrees in the afternoon, but it might be a more reasonable 70 around sunrise, and that's probably when I'm going to go out and run. I coach runners in the southern US, and even if it's 80 something degrees before sunrise, it's still better than 105 later in the day. I'm definitely a member of the 5 a.m. club, sometimes the 4 a.m. club. And if you think a video on how to get up early would be helpful, let me know. So running early does have its advantages, but I also said that it does have a disadvantage, and I'll talk about that one next. You may not realize it, but throughout the night, you breathe, you sweat out a liter, half a liter of fluid just at night. And this is why first thing in the morning, I drink a cup, maybe a pint of water right away before I even have a sip of coffee. Hydration is obviously super important in the warm weather, but maybe not for the exact reason you think. For something like an easy run under an hour, no matter how hot it is, you're probably not gonna hinder your performance because you're losing body hydration. It just doesn't really affect you that much, that fast for such a short, easy run. But that feeling of thirst can make your run feel more difficult because it's uncomfortable. Something I like to remind my runners is that the feeling of fatigue is fatigue. And anything that just doesn't feel great can make your run not feel as good. There was a really interesting study done about this where they hooked runners up to an IV, so they were hydrating them, but they weren't letting them actually drink water and wet their mouth. And so this feeling of thirst with the dry mouth actually increased the level of perceived exertion for their running, which is pretty crazy. So a good way to combat this is to just bring a little handheld with, like a small 8 or 10 ounce one, and take a sip every 5 or 10 minutes or so. This small amount of water isn't really going to impact you physiologically, but it might just feel good. It might feel nice to wet your mouth a bit, and that's going to make the run a little easier. The next tip is related to hydration, and that's with electrolytes, but it has nothing to do with cramping. What I want to talk about instead in regards to electrolytes is something that was one of my biggest running struggles for a couple of years, and that was post-run headaches. These got so bad that I almost stopped long distance running altogether because there would be runs where I would get a headache a couple hours later. I would go to bed with that headache, and sometimes I would wake up with that same headache. I experimented with drinking more water before, during, or after my runs. I experimented with different electrolyte supplements and timing, and I eventually found that pre-run electrolytes prevents almost every time post-run headaches. And I don't know exactly what the mechanism is here. I don't particularly care. All I know is that these pre-run electrolytes prevent post-run headaches. I know that doesn't exactly make your runs more comfortable, but it is nice to not have to know that you're gonna have a post-run headache. But this next tip will make your runs more comfortable, and it's strategically using the wind, sun, and shade when you go out and run. With wind, if there's a northern wind, I may head south first. When I know my core temp and the air temp is a little lower, I head south, but then on my way back home, I might head back north into the wind. So I have that cooling effect from the wind when the temp might be a little bit warmer, when my core temp might be a little bit warmer. Being mindful of sun direction can also be helpful, especially when it's a little bit lower in the sky, to not directly run into it or away from it. If the sun's on your side, you have less surface area directly facing the sun. Be mindful of shade as well. This morning I did a little lollipop loop and I picked the road that has more trees and more shade versus the one that I maybe more typically run that is pretty much totally unshaded. So the wind, the shade, etc., they help make your runs a little more comfortable, but not as more comfortable as this last tip. And that's simply that you're gonna have to accept that you're gonna be slower, get over it, accept it, and slow down. With myself and other runners I coach, easy running and strength work are top priority. The benefit of true easy runs is that you can run more consistently, more frequently, more distance per run and per week. You feel better doing it, you recover better afterwards. You're not continually accumulating fatigue. And keep in mind that just because a run is easy doesn't mean it's not beneficial. Now I admit it gets a little more difficult in the heat because it's just so freaking hot or humid out there. For myself, I often set a heart rate alert on my watch for 150 beats per minute. It's about 80% of my max heart rate. And if that goes off, typically on an incline, I walk for 30 seconds or so. Nasal breathing is also a common tool I use to keep my easy runs easy. And if I can't breathe just out of my nose, again, I walk. This has been a helpful tool for many runners I coach. Most recently, a lady in Istanbul. She realized how good this can be for keeping her core temp and her heart rate down in the summer heat. You actually exhale less moisture out of your nose than your mouth as well. But perceived effort is a primary indicator that I use. The talk test, heart rate, pace, power, nasal breathing, they all support me in using and trying to keep my easy runs at a true good easy effort. One more thing about hot weather running is that if you're not quite out there before the sun comes up, you gotta be mindful of skin protection, and this video will tell you all about that.